We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Gimel and Beis Meseches Eruvin. This is Eruvin Daf 73b. The Mishnah had just said that if they make an Eruvin Chatzeros, but they do not make a Shitufei Mavos, so then you cannot carry in the Mavoi. Now the Mishnah continues, Vim Nishtatfu b'Mavoi, if they made a Shitufei Mavos, Mutar and Kan v'Kan, then they're mutter in both places. This, the Gemara will explain what it means. Irvu b'Chatzeros v'Nishtatfu b'Mavoi. Then the Mishnah says, if they made an Erev Chatzeros and they made a Shitufei Mavos, however, V'Shokach Echad mibnei Chatzer v'lo Erev, but one of the people in the Chatzer forgot and did not join the Erev, so the Eruvin Chatzeros was problematic, Mutar and Kan v'Kan, then it's going to be okay. Rashi here points out, V'shokach echad mibnei Chatzer v'lo Erev b'Chatzero lahater Chatzero aval b'shituf hayalochelach. He was with the shituf, he just didn't join the Eruvin Chatzeros, Mutar and Kan v'Kan. Hashta mashma desomchen. Here it's mashma that you can rely on the Shitufim Avos even though you didn't make the Erev. The Gemara is going to ask this and answer it up, so that is going to be addressed as well. And then finally, the Mishnah says, "Mibnei mavoi v'lo nishtatef." Let's say somebody from the Mavoi did not join the Shituf, Mutarin b'Chatzeros v'Asurin b'Mavoi. So in this case, they're going to be okay in the Chatzer, but your Shitufei Mavos was good, so apparently it's no good because we cannot rely on the Eruvin Chatzeros for the Mavoi. So again, the Mishnah seems to constantly go back and forth on this issue. And finally, the Mishnah ends, Shehamavoi l'Chatzeros keChatzer lebatim. A Mavoi to a Chatzer is just like a Chatzer to the houses. Rashi explains that line. Shehamavoi l'Chatzeros keChatzer lebatim, meaning Kashem she'asr lahotzim min abatim l'chatzer below erev. Just like a person can't carry from the houses to the chatzer without an erev, ka'asr lahotzim min achatzer l'mavoi below shituf sota. You can't carry from a chatzer to the mavoi without a shituf. Below tema, don't say to lo damu debayis v'chatzer zurishus hayachid v'zurishus harabim. Maybe you'll say, well, it's different when it comes to a house. To a chatzer, you're going from a rishus hayachid, an individual's property, to a shared property of a chatzer. Aval chatzer u'mavoi shnein rishuya shal rabim hein. Maybe you'll say from a chatzer to a mavoi should never be a problem because they're both shared property. So that, of course, you cannot say. You need to have something, either a shituf or an erev, something to allow this kind of carrying. And again, as we mentioned in the Mishnah seems to go back and forth as to whether, let's say, an erev chatzeros can cover you in case you didn't do the shituf right, or if a shitufei mavos can cover if you didn't do the erev right. That is going to be addressed in the Gemara. So the Gemara now says, Moni, who is the author of this Mishnah? Rabbi Meir. It seems to be Rabbi Meir. Damar bo'inon erev u'bo'inon shituf. Opening line of the Mishnah seems to say you need to make both an erev and a shituf. Ema mitziyah. So let's take a look now at the middle, at the next phrase in the Mishnah. It said, Vim nishtatfu b'mavoi mutar kan v'kan. It said if they made a shitufei mavos, then they're mutter in both. Sounds like a shitufei mavos alone is going to be effective. Ason l'rabbanan damri b'chodasage. That sounds like the rabbanan who say you just need to make one of the two things. Gemara says to that, holokasha, that's not difficult. Vim nishtatfu nami ko'amar. The Mishnah means if you additionally made a shituf, meaning the Mishnah is saying something very obvious. If you made an Eruvin Chatzeros and did not make a shituf, you've got a problem in the mavoi. But if you also made a shituf in mavos, now you fix the problem in the mavoi. But still, the Mishnah is not consistent. Amos Sefer, let's look towards the end of the Mishnah. Basically, you didn't make your Eruvin Chatzeros correctly, but you did the shituf, mutar and kan v'kan. Again, it seems to be mutter, and here you do not have a good Eruvin Chatzeros because one of the people forgot to join the Erev. So the Gemara says, hey chidami, what's the case? Idalo batil, if the guy who forgot to join the Erev wasn't mevatel his reshus, so it wasn't a good Erev, amai mutarim, why is it good? Elab shita de batil. So then you're going to try to answer, well, the Erev was good because the guy who didn't join the Erev, he was mevatel his reshus. He gave up his reshus. But that's not going to work either because Ema Seifa. Now look at the very end of the Mishnah. It said shakach echad mibnei mavoi v'lo nishtatfu. It said if somebody from the mavoi forgot and he didn't join the shituf, mutar b'chatzeros v'asurin b'mavoi. Mutar in the chatzer still because you made an erev, but the mavoi is no good. The batal. Now, if the guy who didn't join did a bittul of his reshus, amai asur b'mavoi. Why is it asur b'mavoi? In other words, you can't have it both ways. You're going to say in one case you did bittul, one case you didn't do bittul. That's not clear in the Mishnah at all. Now maybe you'll get out of this by saying that Rabbi Meir holds the concept of bittul reshus only works by chatzer, it doesn't work by a mavoi. So it works by Eruvin Chatzeros, and just technically it doesn't work by mavoi. That's not true either. But we learned in a brayso earlier, Sharei bita lochem reshuso. It says that he was mevatel his reshus. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And that brisa, that was a brisa earlier talking about tzedukim, it was talking about mavui. So you see, there is bittul rishus in a mavui. So you can't answer that there just happens to be bittul rishus in a chatzar and not in a mavui. Elop shita de lo batel. Obviously, you're going to have to say the case over here is there was no bittul. Umi the seifa de lo batel, and if in the end of the Mishnah there was no bittul, reisha nami bittul lo batel. Apparently, there was no bittul in the case of the reisha either. So now we have a problem in this Mishnah. Reisha v'seifa Rabbi Meir, you're going to tell me that the beginning and the end of the Mishnah, they both follow Rabbi Meir. In other words, in those cases, we're strict, and we say you need to make both a shituf and an eruv. Mitziyas or Rabbanan, and the middle cases, the Rabbanan, who say that you can just rely on one. Let's say you just make a shituf or you just make an eruv. What's going on? So the Gemara now answers up the Mishnah as follows. Kula Rabbi Meir, the entire Mishnah really is Rabbi Meir. Now, what is the reason that Rabbi Meir says you need to have both an eruv and a shituf? Why is he strict? It's only that we shouldn't forget the concept of eruv. But over here in this case, Kevan deruba irvu, since the majority of the people, they actually did join an eruv, lo mishtacha, so the concept of eruv is not going to be forgotten. In other words, what the Gemara here is answering is the Gemara is saying in this particular case, this is the middle case, irvu bechatzeros v'nishtatfu b'mavui. If they made an eruv chatzeros and they made a shituf mavos, v'shakach echon mimnei chatzer v'lo eruv, and then one person in the chatzer forgot and didn't join the eruv, mutarin kan v'kan, it's going to be mutter everywhere, because here you have the majority of people are really joining, so it's not going to be a problem. Rashi over here says, Kula Rabbi Meir mitziyasa mai somchin b'nei osa chatzer al hashituf. And in the middle case of the Mishnah, why are the people in that chatzer allowed to rely on the shituf? Mishum deruban irvu, because the majority of them actually join the eruv. The time am I, because what is the reason? So in that particular case, Rabbi Meir would make an exception. But in general, we do not rely on an eruv for a shituf. We don't rely on a shituf for an eruv. And the Gemara now continues. Amar Rav Yudah Marav. Rav Yudah says the name of Rav. Lo tani psucho zulazu. In the Mishnah, do not say that the case was that the chatzeros have independent entrances to one another. In other words, until this point, we were understanding that you had two ways to go from one chatzar to the next. There was a door directly connecting the chatzeros, and of course, you could go through the mavui to get from one chatzar to the other. And in that way, you could imagine making an eruv chatzeros to allow you to carry from chatzar to chatzar, but you could also do it through shitufei mavos by going through the mavui. Now, Rav is saying that is not the case. It is impossible that an eruv chatzeros would allow you to carry from one chatzar to the other, because there was no independent entrance directly from one chatzar to the next chatzar. The only way to carry from one chatzar to the other was through the mavui. Rashi here says, Rav lotani psucha zulazu v'chol irvu b'chatzeros demasnisin. When the Mishnah says they made an eruv chatzeros, irvu kol chatzar liatzma kamer, it just means that each chatzar independently made an eruv. Umutarn b'chatzeros dekatanim, mutarn b'nei chatzar liatzman kamer. When it says that the people of the chatzar was mutter to carry, it doesn't mean they can carry from one chatzar to the other. It means within that chatzar they can carry, which is quite obvious, and therefore it's basically saying if they only made the Eruvin Chatzeros, they did not make the Shitufim Avos, so then they can only carry within their independent Chatzeros. V'chein Amar Rav Kahana, and it's the same thing as what Rav Kahana says. He says, Rav lotani psucha zulazu, that Rav did not have in the Mishnah, they opened up to one another. Ika de Amri, some have a slightly different version. Rav Kahana gufe lotani psucha zulazu. Rav Kahana wasn't quoting Rav, he himself did not have the words psuchos zulazu. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. So Abaye now said to Rav Yosef, my time with the lotani psucha zulazu. What is the reason why you would take that out of the Mishnah? Why would you say that the case in the Mishnah was the chatzeros are disconnected from one another unless you go through the mavui? So now he suggests, kasavar, it's because Rav holds, or Rav Kahana holds, kol shituf she'in machniso motzio derech psachim b'mavui, any shitufei mavos where they don't have to go through the mavoi to get to the chatzar, lav shmei shituf is not called a shitufei mavos at all. Rashi over here says, kol shituf she'ein kol echad v'echad machnes chalko derech pesach chatzer l'mavoi v'derech mavoi yolichu l'chatzar she'imunach bo. If you don't need to go through the mavoi to get to the next chatzar, lav shmei shituf, it's not a shituf. Shem yachnisu derech psachim shem chatzar l'chatzar ein nira k'shituf mavoi. If you're able to go from one chatzar to the next directly without the mavoi, that doesn't look like a partnership of the mavoi. Now, the way Rashi explains this right now is that Rav is suspicious. He's afraid. What if you're going to start carrying things not through the mavoi, but through these psachim, and then it's not going to look like a real shituf, and that's why Rav says you can never make a shituf in such a situation. So that's the understanding at the moment. So now the Gemara says, how could this be? Esvei, we have a following question. When We said earlier, if you have a balabayis who happens to be a partner with his neighbors, he didn't make a shitufei mavos, he just happens to have a business partnership. Lazeh b'yayin v'lazeh b'yayin is a partner in wine with each person. Ein srichin la'arev, they don't need to make an erev. That's a good shitufei mavos. So here is a clear question, because here, as Rashi says, Ein sarach la'arev v'hacha delachu chavis b'shutfus. What did they do over here? All they did was they purchased the barrel in a shutfus. The wine has only been in one chutzner. In other words, just to clarify, according to Rav, when they make a shituf, he's saying the actual food that you use for the shituf has to travel through the mavoi to one particular chutzner. So the food goes from all the chatzeros through the mavoi to the one chutzner where it's residing in. And that's why, again, if you have psachim that directly, if you have entrances that directly connect the chatzeros, the shitufah mavos won't work. And now in this case, they just happen to have a partnership. This wine didn't travel through the mavoi to get from one chatzer to the next. So the Gemara answers, Hasam da'afke v'ali. No, the case happens to me. They took the barrel and they just carried it all over the place. They carried it from one chatzer to the next. Rashi says this is a dochak answer, and we're going to eventually reject this, but that's what the Gemara now understands. Esvei, now the Gemara asks another similar question. Keitzad mishtatzvin b'mavoi. It says that how do you make a shitufei mavos? Rashi here explains. Tiyufta kamosav imasisin deperak chalon de lakamon. This is a question from a Mishnah later on. Tekatani hasam keitzad mishtatzvin b'mavoi. It says how you make a shitufei mavos. How do you do it? You do it as follows. Meiniach es achavis v'yomer hareza l'chol b'nei mavoi mezaka lehen. You take a barrel, you say, I'm being mezaka this barrel to everyone in the mavoi. Apparently one guy's using his own wine and just being mezaka to everybody. I'm giving everyone a portion of this wine. It's never going into the chatzeros. It's not traveling from one chatzer to the other chatzer through the mavoi. So again, what kind of business is this? So the Gemara says, Hasam nami da'afke v'aili. You'll have to say over there as well in that Mishnah, you took it into the mavoi and you brought it to the various chatzeros. So Maskif lo Rav Bar Chanan. So now Rav Bar Chanan asks the following question: Elameato hikne lo pas besalo. Let's say a person was makne he has some bread in a basket, and I'm going to be makne to make it for a shituf. Hachanami de lo have a shituf. Are you saying that's not a good shituf because it didn't travel through the mavoi? V'chitema hachanami. If you're going to say that's actually true, v'amar Rav Yehuda Marav, but Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, b'nei chabura shayu mesubin v'kidish alein hayom. Let's say you have people, they're part of a group, and Shabbos comes, Hapas Sha'al Shulchan Somchan Aleh Mishum Erev, you can rely on the bread that's sitting on the table as an Erev. V'yamri lo Mishum Shituf, and some people say you can rely on it as Shituf. V'yomar Rabba, and Rabba said, going on that, he said as follows, Lo pligi, they're not arguing, Kan b'mesubin b'bayis, Kan b'mesubin b'chotzer. When one version says it was an Erev, this bread, and one version says it was a shituf, it just depends where the bread is. If the bread's in the house, then that's an Erev. If the bread's in the chotzer, then that's a shituf. Rashi over here says, Mesubin b'bayis somchem mishum Erev. If the bread is sitting on a table in the house, then it's an Erev hachotzer. Kedamar lekamon, Eruv chatzeros b'bayis shebechotzer. The general rule is, an Erev chatzeros is placed in a house, and Mesubin b'chotzer, somchem mishum shituf. If the bread is in the chotzer, that's called a shitufim mavos. The shitufim mavos, mutter lanichan b'chotzer. It's okay to put a shitufim mavos in a chotzer, shebemavoi, which is in the mavoi. Aval mishum Erev lo. You can't do an Erev in a chotzer. Now, you could, of course, do a shitufim mavos in a house as well, but it's also okay in a chotzer. The bayis ba'inon the Erev mishum dira. As we said already a few times, for Erev you need it to be a dira, in a living quarters. It needs to be in the house. For chotzer la bar dirahi. A chotzer is not a place where you live, but for shitufim mavos, where it doesn't need to be dira, so you could do it in the chotzer, and that's why one version said it was in a chotzer. But in any case, over here also, where is this thing that it's traveling through the mavo? It's not true. So rather, the Gemara gives a different teretz. Al-Taima de Rav, the real reason of Rav, why he says he doesn't want there to be an entrance connecting the chatzeros, to kasavar ein mavoi niter b'lechi v'kora, because he holds a mavoi you can't matter a mavoi with either a lechi, a pole at the front, or a beam at the front of the mavoi, ad shehu batim v'chatzeros psuchim l'socho, unless you have houses and chatzeros opening up into the mavoi. Now we should note over here that this doesn't radically change what Rav says. Rav still is saying that the chatzeros cannot open up into one another, because if they do open up into one another, you're not allowed to make a shitufei mavos, because a shitufei mavos can only be made in a situation where the only way to get from the chatzeros to the other, from one chatzer to the next, is through the mavoi. Apparently, if they all open up into one another, then it's all just like one big chutzner. It's not like multiple chatzeros. So that's why Rav says in the Mishnah, the chatzeros are not opening up one into the other. The difference over here is that before Rav had said something even more radical, that not only can the chatzeros not open up into one another, but the reason why the chatzeros can't open up into one another is because the food has to travel through from all the chatzeros through the mavoi to one chatzer. Otherwise, you can't make a shitufim avos. That we're rejecting. We're saying absolutely not. The food does not need to travel. You could just pick up the food in the chatzer, be Mesechet to everybody. That's a shitufim avos. But still, Rav is still saying that the chatzeros cannot open up into one another if you want to make a shitufim avos. And the Gemara now finishes off the Amud. Gufa, let's analyze that statement itself. Amar Rav says, Ein mavoi niter belechi v'kora. A mavoi cannot be allowed with a lechi and kora, and we'll see the continuation of this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph.